Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Beyond the Book. This is an author talk for the authors of Connor the Cutter series. We have with us today Scott McBride and Rod Thompson, who are both local authors who have written the Connor the Cutter series. They are on book 4 currently. Scott was in the Navy for 9 years and is currently serving in the Coast Guard, and where he has been serving for 12 years. And Rod has been in the Navy for 21 years. So we have them joining us today to celebrate our really large and awesome military community here in Suffolk. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us. It's awesome.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So we're going to have them read one of their books today, which is awesome. And then we will ask them some questions that you submitted. So I'm going to turn it over to them and let them read you their book.
Woohoo! Thank you so much. We're really excited to be here. There's nothing we love more than reading books, and reading Connor the Cutter especially because it's so much fun. Let me find my page here.
Yeah.
So
this is the first time we've done it this way. So we're really, really excited to do this virtually for the kids.
Yeah.
And we want to, honestly, anybody who ever hears the stories of Connor the Cutter immediately becomes a member of what we call the Courageous Crew. So for all of the Courageous Crew, every book starts with this poem. Whoop, it disappeared. With this poem. And so we're going to read the poem together with you guys. And if you have one of the books at home, definitely follow along. We're reading book 3, Mystery of the Baffling Blackout. And Scott, are you ready to go to Serendipity Sound, my man?
I am ready. Actually, two nuggets of trivia real quick before we start.
Ooh.
So kids, you have book 1 and book 2. When you see this poem, you'll notice something different in book 3 about this poem. And if you guys can point that out, you get extra credit points.
Love the extra credit points.
Yes. All right, so Rod, ready?
I'm ready when you are. All right.
All right. Journey
with me to a place far away, across the seas and beyond the bays, through the big river basins,
and
just past the capes, there's a place full of boats of all sizes and shapes. Come hear their tales, come gather round, and take a voyage with me to Serendipity Sound. It's really weird reading in unison via Zoom.
Really weird. Oh, and the reason why we have this poem at the beginning of every single story is we want a familiarity. Every time kids come back to this story, we want them to kind of come back to Serendipity Sound, and this is kind of a nice way to do it. So, all right.
Yeah.
Let me know when you're ready, Rod. I'll go ahead.
I'm ready when you're ready.
All right. It was a foggy autumn evening in Serendipity Sound as Felipe the fishing trawler dragged his nets for a late day catch. Connor the Cutter and all the other boats floated at their piers, anxiously awaiting the arrival of Francis the freighter.
Simon the submarine cruised by with a mischievous grin on his face. Hey, topsiders, what you doing? None of your business, sneered Yardley the yacht. Does your kind not understand manners?
Yeah. Barry the barge laughed. Why don't you go back down below with them other sinkers? We're waiting for Francis the freighter to bring us some gas before we're all bone dry. Connor didn't know Simon, but he couldn't help but notice how sad he looked as he slowly sunk below the surface.
Sad face.
Just then, Anna's light went out, followed by all the lights around the sound. Naomi the news chopper swooped down and announced, "This just in, the power's out on the whole island."
Barry the Bard spoke up. Not good. My tank's almost empty, and without Anna the lighthouse, old Francis won't be able to find a channel.
Something or someone must have messed with the power cables beneath the water to cause the blackout, Grayson the Tug and Toes speculated.
By George, Yardley proclaimed, this sounds like a mystery. If there's one thing I know how to do well, it's solve a mystery.
If something bad has happened, Connor added, you may need my help. Count me in.
To the rescue.
Yardley and Connor set out in search of the source of the power outage. As they rounded a bend, they came across Thaddeus the tugboat fast asleep, floating out into the sound.
Look, just there, Connor, Yardley said. Thaddeus's lines have been cut. He's been set adrift. Help me, won't you?
I'm on it, Connor affirmed.
The two of them pushed Thaddeus back to his pier and secured his lines. It would take something strong to cut those lines. A large blade or a claw, Yardley speculated.
Connor thought hard. Doesn't Simon the submarine have a claw hook?
Indeed, my dear boy.
Just then, the loud horn of an incoming freighter echoed in the distance.
Suddenly, Faith the fireboat rushed up to Connor and Yardley in a tizzy. Ew, get it off, she yelled.
On her deck, a large jellyfish was sliming about, trying to find its way back into the water. Hold on, Faith, Connor said, giving her a nudge. She listed to the right, and the jellyfish slid into the water with a splash.
My dear, what nefarious thing has happened here? Yardley asked.
I was just
Go ahead.
I was just throwing away my hoses when something threw this jellyfish out at me. It's so dark, I couldn't see who it was. That jellyfish almost stung me.
Through, you say? Yardley echoed. First the power, then Thaddeus, and now this jellyfish business. By George, I think we have a prankster in our midst.
A prankster, Connor thought. These pranks are not nice, and someone could get hurt.
Off in the distance, Francis's horn bellowed, but this time it was louder. Closer.
High above the sound, Naomi saw a dark shadow with a few lights lurking just beneath the water, heading out of the channel. Good evening. News Chapter 6 with a live report, she broadcasted. Is Simon the submarine to blame for the bizarre power outage? Updates at 11. Connor heard the announcement and radioed Naomi. Naomi, it's Connor. Yardley and I will track down Simon and see what he knows. We need you to fly out to Francis and tell him not to enter the port until the power comes back on. Yes, serendipity, Naomi yelled as she flew off toward the horizon.
I always knew it was Simon, Yardley grumbled. Submarines are not to be trusted, you see. They don't behave like us boats. Come on, Connor. He's got to be around here somewhere.
Don't you think you're being a little too hard on Simon? Asked Connor as he searched the area with the spotlight. I agree that Simon's pranks aren't always funny, but just because he's a little different from us doesn't mean he's bad, does it?
Just then, Simon the submarine popped up in front of Connor. You must be new around here, Simon said with a frown. Boats like him have never liked subs like me. We know it was you who cut the power, Yardley declared. I'm reporting this to the harbor master post-haste. You're going to dry dock for an eternity, if I have my say. What? No, Simon cried. It wasn't me. I didn't do nothing.
Well, someone turned off the power, said Connor. How do you explain Thaddeus's cut lines, or the jellyfish?
And you're the only one with a claw, Yardley scoffed. And the only one who can reach the power cables under the water. Explain that, Simon. Simon stuttered. I was just trying to be funny, to make friends. He looked down towards the water. But I promise I didn't do nothing to no power. We'll see about that, said Yardley. You need to leave right this minute. We don't like your kind around here. Go before I call the harbor master about the mess you've made of things. Simon quickly submerged and headed out to sea. Poor guy.
As Connor and Yardley headed back to the Sound, Connor couldn't help but feel a little confused. He barely even knew Simon, but he did know how tough it was to make friends. He remembered when he first arrived in the Sound and how he was so worried that no one would like him. He had to speak up. You shouldn't treat others like that, Yardley, Connor said. Simon's one of the harbor master's boats, just like you and me. He was only trying to make friends.
Hardly like you and me, Connor, Yardley said with a scoff. And he's not going to make any friends pulling pranks like those. Just then, Felipe cruised up to the other boats, whistling a merry tune. Good evening, my friends. A most strange and foggy night for a blackout, yes? I feel as though I have a good catch tonight. The harbor master will be pleased. My nets are quite heavy. Felipe struggled under the weight of his nets as he pulled them out of the water. Ay, 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 what is that?
A large cable spitting electricity and sparks came up from the water, tangled in Felipe's nets. Barry the barge jumped back. Is that some kind of jumbo electric eel? Connor shook his bow. No, it's an electrical cable.
Oh, no, Felipe blushed. I must have snagged it, the underwater cable with my nets. How foolish of me. I'm to blame for the blackout. I'm sorry, mis amigos. Yardley looked at Connor before casting his gaze down into the dark water. Simon really didn't do it, he said quietly. Felipe examined the cable. How do we fix this? Francis needs to pull in before everyone runs out of fuel. A cable like this, Yardley said, must be really attached under the water. The only thing that can fix this is,
A submarine, Connor exclaimed. Come on, Yardley. We need to find Simon.
Now it's an adventure. In the channel, Connor and Yardley spotted William the seaplane in the sky and flagged him down to see if he knew which way Simon had gone. William landed and floated to a stop. Well, I'll tell ya, he could have gone this way, he could have gone that way, but Gangplank Grotto is what I thought I heard him say. Yardley looked terrified. Gangplank Grotto? Count me out. That's far away from Beacon Island, where scoundrels and troublemakers hang out.
Then we need to stop him before he gets there, Connor called out. I'm going with or without you, Yardley.
Connor.
Just beyond Beacon Island, Connor saw Simon's periscope above the surface. Simon, he called.
Simon slowly emerged from the water. Leave me alone.
We know you didn't turn off the power, Connor yelled, but Simon kept going toward Gangplank Grotto. Simon, we're sorry. Felipe accidentally cut the power line while dragging his nets. We're sorry for how we treated you. It wasn't right.
Simon stopped and turned around. But I'm not like you guys, Simon said. You said I'm not welcome in the Sound. Why should I stay? No one likes me here.
Connor smiled with a big grin. You are welcome in Serendipity Sound, Simon. The harbor master wants all his vessels to be happy there, not just the ones above the water. We need you right now so Francis can enter the port safely and bring us fuel. The one thing that makes you different is what makes you special. You're the only one who can fix the power. You'll be a hero.
Simon grew excited. A hero like you?
Connor shook his bow. If I was a real hero, I would have never let the other boats treat you so badly. I'm sorry, Simon.
Simon gave a small smile. It's okay, Connor. I forgive you. Well, what are we waiting for? We got a cable to fix. Oh, I'm dropping the ball here. There we go.
All the boats cheered as Simon fixed the cable and restored power to the island. As Simon breached the surface, Connor cruised up next to him. Everyone meet the hero of Serendipity Sound, Simon the submarine.
Anna's light came on as she awoke from her slumber. Oh, my darlings, what did I miss?
Nothing a submarine couldn't handle, Connor replied.
By the beam of Anna's light, Francis the freighter safely entered the Sound, while Connor and all of his pals gave Simon the submarine a hearty serendipity salute. Toot, toot.
The end.
The end.
That was fun. We survived our first virtual Zoom.
It's been a while. I forgot the timing of who was doing what voices.
That was magical. That was absolutely magical. I love the voices with the characters.
This is actually the first time Rod and I have done this. I mean, literally cold iron.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Picked up where we left off.
I love it. Do you, Rod, want to stop sharing your screen and then we'll be...
Oh, yeah. Let's stop sharing. Sorry about that. I was completely off the marks on... I was completely off the marks on turning pages. Sorry, kids.
That's okay. I thought it was amazing. I was really into it. So that was awesome.
Thank you.
I've got the headphones on, so it's like a really good audio book in here.
That's awesome.
Complete with nature sounds.
Yeah, right. So do you want to tell us anything about your fourth book that'll be coming out
this year, right? Is that right?
The plan was for this year. We normally aim for around in November, December launch time. And this book is really, I tell you, book 4 is really exciting. It's a lot of fun. We introduce another new character in this, 2 new characters in this book. I'm trying to not give too much away. Let's just say that this will basically, the first 4 books, we like to call them the 4 seasons, because the first book takes place in spring, the second one's in summer, third is kind of fallish, and then the fourth one definitely is in the winter time. So we'll see a little bit of snow, maybe.
Icebreakers?
Maybe.
Coming from Cleveland and D9.
Yes.
An icebreaker.
So there may be an icebreaker somewhere in the future, I may say. But yeah, and this one's really good because Connor is going to learn a very valuable lesson. This is kind of the end of his first year in Serendipity Sound, so this kind of wraps up the first 4 books, and I'm excited for it. I love the story. The story's really good, and Scott and I pour our hearts into it. We're not going to give away anything that's not. We're not going to put anything out there that's not 100% awesome. So.
Yeah, I love
Scott,
that.
your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. I think about when Rod and I met, and we kind of storyboarded the first book on this napkin at Panera. We always say this is a magic Panera napkin. We met at a park as we were working on the story, and we actually kind of thought about the first 4 or 5 books this one afternoon, and it's been kind of cool that we've kind of tracked along. And this will be the 4th of the series, and these books are special because we want to put obviously our son's Connor. Rod's got a son named Connor. I've got a son named Connor, and my Connor is 13 and Rod's Connor is 18. And it's funny because Rod's Connor was 13 when we started this, so it's kind of special. But we also have other sons, and we want to make sure that they get represented in the stories as well. And this would be nice to get Rod's son, Keaton, in the story.
Yeah.
In the submarine. You got Grayson the Tug and Tow, my son. Simon's Rod's son. And Keaton will be the last one in the series.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, we had some kids in the area submit questions for all of you. Some things you've kind of alluded to, but we're going to ask them. So these questions, 3 questions that are tied together, come from Luke, who's 7. He wants to know, how did you get the idea for the book? What kind of boat is Connor? And why is the boat named Connor?
Scott, I'll let you take all 3 of those.
Who submitted the question? Luke. So thanks for the question, Luke. So the first part of the question is, how did we come up with the story?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the accidental author. The idea was given to me to write children's books when I was in graduate school at UNC Chapel Hill. Fast forward a couple years, I was in church and did not know Rod, other than we would kind of exchange pleasantries at half court. We were worshiping in a basketball court for contemporary worship, and I'd be like, "Hey, what's your name again?" And he's like, "I'm Rod." And he's like, "What's your name?" And I'm like, "I'm Scott." And we would just kind of chat, very superficial, nothing beyond that. But obviously, I was like, "This guy seems pretty cool." But I was sitting in church one day, and I heard a voice say, "The bald guy on stage is the one that's going to help you write this story." And Rob was doing puppet ministries at the time. And I thought that was kind of strange, right? Like, you don't normally think, you don't hear a voice, you don't get a feeling. And I walked up to Rod after church and I said, "Hey man, I got an idea for a children's book. And it's going to be, and I didn't know anything about Rod other than he was in the Navy. His name was Roger. And he's like, "What's it called?" And I was like, "Connor the Cutter. I have a son named Connor and I'm in the Coast Guard." And then Rod says,
"Oh, the angels sang." And I said, "Oh, I have a son named Connor." And so it immediately, because initially I was like, I don't write children's books. And the second he said the character's name, I said, I suddenly find myself writing children's books. I think I'm going to try this out. So we went to Panera Bread and we sat down and had lunch as a family, and we all sat down, we fellowshiped together, and just started throwing stuff on that napkin. And that's really how the story just started evolving from there. We picked out all the characters we wanted to use, and then the story just kind of grew organically out of the characters. It was really cool.
And what we did was when we sat down, we basically brainstormed. We had our laptops, I still remember it. And we would Google images of boats. And we'd say, like, here's a tugboat. Like, what sort of emotion or feeling or character kind of comes to mind when you see this tugboat? And so Rod and I were like, we're just brainstorming, like two kids. And our sons were there, and they're like, what about this? And this guy seems kind of rugged, because tugboats are kind of rugged. They got like that, they got barnacles on them, and they got like
They're grumpy
fender and stuff. They look grumpy and tough. We're like, Daddy's the tugboat. He's worn out, he's experienced. He's kind of like your crusty grandfather.
He's salty.
He's salty. You got to earn his respect, but once you earn his respect, in book one, it's actually Thaddeus that gives Connor the title Connor the Courageous Cutter. He's just Connor the Cutter, and he gives him the title of Connor the Courageous Cutter. So he kind of earns that title. And I think the other part of the question was why.
What kind of boat is Connor?
What kind of boat? So Connor is he's a cutter. And in the Coast Guard, we name our boats cutters. But in the book, we like to say he's a fast patrol boat that goes up and down the coast.
Nice. Our next question comes from Madelyn, age 10, and she wants to know what made you interested in writing a book about boats.
Okay, so again, thank you, Madelyn, for the question. I will say that, for me and Scott, it's sort of obvious for us because, Scott has spent, most of his life in the Navy or the Coast Guard. I've been in the Navy for 21 years. And when you get right down to it, when we were trying to figure out how we were going to tell the story, we asked ourselves, we're like, are we going to include human characters? Are they all just going to be boats? And obviously we went with all just boats, because we knew Connor the Cutter was obviously going to be a cutter. And so what we did from that point was we started looking at all the different people around us, friends, family, people we work with. And you start finding these really cool little personalities. And you start saying, okay, if that person, kind of like Scott was saying about Thaddeus, the tugboat, we said, okay, well, what kind of personality would this boat have? And then you find people and you're like, oh yeah, that's exactly how that boat would act. And we call it people watching and character building all at the same time. But in the end, yeah, it really came down to the fact, I think we know boats, right, Scott? I mean, we're boat people.
Right. And a lot of times they say, write about things that you like or subjects that you know about. And we are boat people. We love boats. And, it's funny, when the original idea came to me in grad school, Coast Guard families love, as you know, having been a Coast Guard family, our Coast Guard family, we tend to like things that, if there's anything Coast Guard related, like we grab onto them, right? Like Coast Guard.
Very true.
And Rod's kind of seen that. And I was like, you know what? I was like, we've seen planes. Disney's done planes. We've seen cars. We've seen Thomas the Tank Engine. I was like, there's really nothing on boats out there. And I was like, this would be a great thing for families, if we did a story about boats. And that's kind of how we wanted Connor the Cutter to be bigger than Coast Guard, because we wanted to kind of touch everybody. But you kind of have this, fast patrol boat that goes up and down the coast. And a lot of Coast Guard families love it. My Navy friends.
They'll have a great moral message. So you are really getting more of a broad audience with that too.
Yeah.
We love the stories.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually will bring us to our next question. So this is from James, age 7. He wants to know, which Connor book is your favorite and why?
Scott, I'll let you go first on that one, buddy.
James, that is a tough question. I'll say that I like all three. I like all three for different reasons. I mean, Saving Sarah is the first one. It's like Star Wars: A New Hope. Whenever we read that book, it kind of takes me back to the beginning, like when we were excited, and we're still excited. We still love this, but every time I go back to book one, I'm like, did we write this, Rob? Like this is such a great story. And then book two, I love because it's got such a different, it's an adventure. You get this adventure and this, great message of temptation, and then I love book three too. Like book three has been kind of the one we've been reading a lot lately. I think that message resonates right now, diversity and stuff. So I like all three of them. I like all three of them. And I feel like we've grown as authors, and the illustrator has grown. I think like his is getting better and better. He was awesome in the beginning, and like the book cover for this book. I mean, we had him do this, and we're like, man, that is awesome. Like, you got like this underwater scene, and so it's kind of cool that all three of us are growing together. So that's my. Great question, James. I'll let Rod take it.
See, I'm gonna have to say I hate to say the same answer. I'd say that I love all three, but it's really hard. It's kind of like having kids. where, you know, I don't have a favorite and I love them all equally, even though they're all completely different. And I agree with Scott. I think the first book I absolutely will adore, because that was the first thing we ever did. You know, it was like, we did this, we made this awesome book. But it's fun because as you go along, you're like, you know, after you publish the first book, then the second one, like, you're like, okay, so we figured out how to publish. So now what kind of fun do we want to have with this? And so you write the adventure story, and then after the adventure story, we're like, okay, well, now what stories do we really want to tell? And so book 3 was the brainchild of that. And again, just like Scott says, I love them all equally, but differently. So
yeah. And it's funny when we you know, you read like book 3. I think of like these musicians that go to concerts, right? And they go out there and they're singing their like latest album, and you know, the crowd may not be familiar with the new song. Then they go, like, at the encore, they go back to the original, like the popular songs. Everyone goes crazy, right? Like, it's always nice. Like, sometimes we'll do a book event. We'll be like, let's take it back to the beginning. Let's go back to where we started and read the original Connor the Cutter. And it's always exciting to see it. And the other thing too, I think is really cool, is when we first started, I remember the very first couple of book events, Rod and I would always ask the question, has anyone ever heard of this book? It was like crickets. You might hear
he's crying.
Tumbleweed would go across the stage. You might hear an owl. But now when we go back and you kind of have familiarity and kind of repeat fans, like, they know the story. They know the story better than us, Rod. Like, I'll bring up the point about Sarah, or they know the story better than us. Sarah's not a lighthouse. It's and we'll ask a trivia question, and they know the answers. So that is really, really cool to see, like, the fans. They know these characters, and it's awesome.
Really great. Well, you all mentioned the illustrators. So actually, Jacob, who's 5 years old, wants to know who drew the pictures for your book, and how did they know what Connor looked like?
Ooh. So you said it was Jacob that asked that question?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you, Jacob, because that's also a really, really good question. So the illustrator, his name is Brian Martin. And what we did was we picked him out of a group of people. And those group of people, we reached out to them and said, hey, we're working on this book named Connor the Cutter. He's a boat, and this is what he may look like, and we want you guys to draw him. And so those people, they all submitted drawings to us. And Brian, because it's kind of funny when if you ever think about a story in your head, like if you're ever making up a story or something, you kind of see what the character looks like. Like when we were writing the first book, before we ever even saw a drawing of Connor, we kind of knew what Connor looked like in our imaginations. And so when Brian submitted his drawing to us, it looked almost exactly like what we had in our heads. And so really, we didn't know what Connor the Cutter was going to look like until our illustrator knew what Connor the Cutter was going to look like. And he kind of created the Connor the Cutter look. So he created Connor.
And it's funny because when we first started, we actually hired a freelance illustrator. They're very hard to find because we needed something for our Kickstarter campaign. And that Connor the Cutter, it was really kind of cool. You get excited because you got this character that kind of comes to life, and you see him for the first time or see her for the first time. And that Connor the Cutter looked nothing like this Connor. He almost looked Pixar-ish. He looked straight out of Cars, you know. Or
it was 100% a Pixar Cars replication.
Rod had the foresight to be like, we don't want to look like Disney. We want to do our own thing.
We're gonna get sued.
Brian nailed it. Now, here's a funny little anecdote about Brian. We did a book signing at Tyson Corner. It was our very first Tyson Corner. I'm from McLean, Virginia, and it was kind of like a homecoming event because kids from elementary school that I've known come out of the woodwork to support. It's awesome. And we're sitting there, and my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, they come over and they meet Brian for the first time. Like, hey, this is Brian, the art illustrator. And Brian's like, Mr. Goldsby? And my father-in-law's like, do I know you? And he goes, oh yeah, I'm Rich Martin's son. My father-in-law worked for his dad in his last job before he retired, before he went to the Naval Academy to work. And of all the illustrators in the world we picked it. So he actually had, for his retirement gift, he had a character that was illustrated by Brian Martin. It's just funny how the world works, right?
Yeah. That's amazing.
I know. What are the chances?
Yeah, that's crazy. So actually, speaking of the artwork, this is actually a question from one of our library staff members. So was the artwork inspired by any other children's books?
No. We actually, it was funny because we talked to when we were working with the illustrator and we were working with our publisher, we were trying to find a unique look. And the one thing our publisher told us, he says, you're not the first people or the last people to put a face on a vehicle, meaning a car, a plane. And like we mentioned, Pixar cars and planes and, Thomas the Tank Engine and things like that. And there were so many things that had already been done, obviously, with all those pre-existing stories. That it really was kind of going more with what we felt inside. When we looked at that picture of Connor, we knew that was our Connor. It never really was like an inspirational thing for us. It was just, that's it. Because when we looked at all those different samples from the different illustrators, and there were some in there. One of them looked like a marshmallow on a life preserver, and we're like, that's not Connor.
SpongeBob Square Cutter.
Yeah, SpongeBob Square Cutter is what he looked like. And when it came down to it, though, and we looked at the one that we eventually went with, this guy right here next to me, Connor the Cutter, we knew hands down that's what he was going to look like. And the thing it really wasn't a matter of like, does he look like anything that's already out there? Because there was really no way of avoiding at some point in time. Like, again, we weren't the first or the last people to put a face on a boat. So
that's a great question. And one thing that's really cool about this process is we've grown close with our illustrator. Most authors don't ever meet their illustrators if you go kind of the traditional publishing route. And for us, it's a collaborative team. And Brian will come back. It's really kind of neat. Like we'll give them the manuscript, and then we'll have a description of what the scene looks like. And we'll say, for example, Rod's screen, he'll say like, it's a sunny day. Connor, Faith, and Thaddeus are at the pier. End of the lighthouse is in the background. And then the illustrator takes that interpretation, puts it in black and white, sends it to us. And you're like, oh yeah, can you make this? So actually you start out with the characters. So you have to figure out what the character's gonna look like. So he does each individual character. So after you nail Connor the Cutter, you're like, oh, that's awesome. And then he's like, all right, what does Faith the Fireboat look like? We're like, oh man, what does Faith the Fireboat look like? So then you got to figure out each character. Then you start putting the scenes together. And then after that, it's like, what are the colors? So and you're like, oh, what color is that?
Yeah, I think we left too much just a chance with the colors, because like when we gave them the designs, I remember with Sarah the Schooner, we racked our brains forever trying to figure out what color her sails were going to be. It was just the sail color. Like I wanted to be like, hey, let's just go with it, man. Just surprise us. But at the end of the day, I was like, okay, this is a character that's going to last at least through 4 more books. So we need to lock something in.
Yes.
Nice. All right. You have already told us that you both have a son named Connor. Are any other characters named after family members?
Yeah. So Simon the Submarine of book 3. Oh, it disappeared. That is my son Simon. He's 13 now. And then in book 4, you'll meet Keaton the Ice Crusher. I know it's supposed to be Icebreaker, but we went with Ice Crusher for alliteration. So you'll meet Keaton the Ice Crusher, who is also he's a big boat. Yeah. Scott.
Nice.
And then my son Grace. It's funny. It's tough when you got boys, and we obviously Connor the Cutter came to mind. And how do you explain that to your youngest son that his oldest brother has a book series named after him? And it's funny because there's a little friendly rivalry between them. And in book 2, Grayson, when they were younger, he'd be like, "How's it feel to have your younger brother come to your rescue?" And Connor's like, "I hope you sink at the pier, Grayson." I'm like, wow, they're competing in this like fictional world. But yeah, it's been special to put our boys in there.
Nice. I have 2 boys myself, so I can relate to the competitive nature, and all right. So our final question comes from Charlie, who's age 3, and he wants to know: have you ever sailed across the sea?
Ooh. So many times. I've actually sailed around the world a few times. I added it all up. And I've done one full line all the way around the world. But yeah, I've crossed the ocean a great many times. Scott, I think you've been in that boat as well, yeah?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Charlie. So yeah, back in my Navy days, I used to get underway a lot. And I think having been out to sea and seeing, being around boats and seeing those things helps you when you're putting the story together. Because, obviously when you're out at sea, the things you see, there's emotions, there's things that you kind of experience, and you kind of need that when you're putting this book together. And I remember our illustrator, he'd never had any real maritime nautical experience. And Rod and I were able to provide that perspective and be like, this is why you want the lighting over here. This is why when the fog rolls in, this is what the lights would look like. And he's like, oh, I never thought about that because I've never actually experienced it. So I think, the fact that Rod and I have been out at sea and our sailors, that's definitely helped with the story, putting them together, especially with the visuals.
Very cool. Okay, well, before we wrap up here and go, did you all have anything you wanted to add?
I always like to tell the kids 100% that no matter what your dream is in life, no matter what your goal is, whether you want to play in the NBA or if you want to write books or, be a famous movie star or just, be something as awesome as a teacher or a librarian or a hero like a nurse or a paramedic, do it, man. Go for it. And don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't do it because, Scott and I, we had a dream to write some really awesome children's books. And here we are spending time with you guys, even virtually right now, because we followed that dream. So definitely chase your dreams until you can grab them and then you give them a big hug.
So a lot of times, I remember when we got close to publishing book one, and I was sharing this with a mentor of mine. She said, congratulations, you're in the top 1% of people that realize a dream. I remember thinking, like, what a profound comment that she made. And I was like, why Rod and I? Like, what made us different? And at the end of the day, we like to tell the kids, we just had the courage to try. And, I love this quote by Martin Luther King. It says, take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And I think if you kids remember that and you just have the courage, take the first step. And then the next step becomes easier and the next step becomes easier. And the next thing you know, you're writing it down on a napkin. And the next thing you know, you got a book. And Rod and I always like to tell people, write your goals down, because when you write them down, there's accountability. Plus, you see it every single day, and you can work towards that goal, and you can work towards achieving it. And that's why Rod and I wrote this down on a magical Panera napkin on March 15th, 2015. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so for all of you kids at home, we are actually going to do an extension activity. So we're asking you to write letters for Operation Gratitude, which is an organization that sends letters to active duty members, veterans, our frontline workers, so like police officers and firefighters. So if you're interested in submitting a letter, you can email it to me at awatkins@suffolkva.us. You can take a picture of it or scan it in, and there will be a link to this on our online calendar. So you can get more information about how to submit your letter. They don't need to be in a sealed envelope. We'll take care of that on our end at the library, but feel free to write letters, draw fun pictures, and really encourage our servicemen and women. And that is all we have today. So I just want to thank you guys again. This was fantastic. I really had fun. You guys are great at the voices. I was really entertained.
Well, thank you so much again for having us. I really like your shirt, by the way. I love the anchors.
I got to rock the anchors. I put it up specifically for this.
I have to pay respect to the anchors. I got to pay respect to the anchors. So. But thank you so much. We enjoyed this so much.
Yeah, this was great. So thank you guys.
It was awesome. It was a lot of fun and definitely the highlight of our day. So thanks.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you all next time for Beyond the Book. Bye.